you've got a sneaking suspicion that you might have some sort of mercury poisoning or heavy metal toxicity. You've probably read places all the different types of effects of various metals, ranging from fatigue and just very vague symptoms that almost anyone could relate to. Now, you might be wondering, is there an effective way to actually test for heavy metals? Personally, I've been diving deep into heavy metal research for about the last year. I've studied almost all of Andy Cutler's work on heavy metal chelation. I've read a lot of different books with detoxing and other various information relating to this general topic. I've spent a lot of time browsing forums, videos. I'm sure you have too if you've made it to this point. Now, when it comes to the effectiveness of doing a provoked urine test, I think there's quite a bit of issues that come to mind. One of the first things that I think is the safety around doing a provoked urine test. A lot of people might say that, DMSA is very safe, and I would agree. I think there's a lot of safety related to DMSA, especially at the lower recommended doses. It seems like it's quite rare that someone has a negative reaction. However, for a provoked urine test, typically someone is going to take excess of 500 milligrams to even amounts close to 2,000 milligrams of DMSA. Now, this could potentially lead to some issues for someone who might be really toxic with these metals. Or, for example, if someone maybe has a filling in their mouth that has mercury in it, or if their environment has mercury in it, and then they go and take a bunch of DMSA, this could potentially be quite hazardous to this person. It's also quite rare that someone might have a severe allergic reaction just to the substance DMSA itself. And of course, if they did have some sort of negative reaction and then took a bunch of DMSA, that could potentially even just be fatal alone. That's one big concern with doing a provoked urine test. Now, some of that could be slightly negated potentially by someone maybe doing smaller rounds of DMSA and working up. Another concern with doing a provoked urine test would be knowing an actual safe range for how much of these toxins someone should have. Now, of course, we could argue that someone should have really none of these metals in their body. That would be ideal. You don't want any mercury in your body. And the problem with this range too is the fact that everyone's sensitivity is going to heavily vary. Someone might be able to handle a lot of mercury in their body before it becomes an issue versus someone else who's maybe in a small range of it has, effects that someone might get at much higher levels of it, and it's definitely going to cause them a lot of issues. When you're doing a provoked urine test, there's not really a lot of comparable data to go against. Now, I recently listened to Joseph Pizzorno, and he mentioned in a podcast that he's actually used a provoked urine test with thousands of clients. And I'll go ahead and I'll link that podcast in the description below. Now, for him, he might actually have some sort of range that's effective. However, when I see a lot of people actually getting a urine test back, the safe ranges for those are actually for not provoked urine tests. So, of course, when you do a substance like DMSA that is going to greatly chelate these, from what I've seen, up to 77 times normal of what you would just normally urinate out. Of course, your tests are going to score a lot higher than the average person doing it, and it's going to look alarming when you're reading this report saying that you have a bunch of these metals inside of you. This could cause a lot of confusion for someone, and really it would almost just bring to question if it's even effective at all, because these metals are going to be inside basically anyone who's going to take these. I've read reports of people just doing studies of people doing regular tests and then provoked urine tests, which I'll have a link to that down below where you guys can read more information on that. And all of the subjects already, without being provoked at all, still showed these metals in their system from vaccines, fish, and even when you're born, it comes from your mom. You can actually get these metals in your body while you're in the womb. These are almost completely unavoidable at this point. So it's really hard to determine some sort of safe range or range where you would want to take further action against these metals. Of course, like I mentioned, having none would be the best. I think this really calls into question a lot of the value of really doing one of these provoked tests. Personally, I can't seem to find anywhere where I could take this information and make it useful to me. Maybe if I had, an elevated amount in one metal, I could try to identify symptoms of that specific metal in my body, and then I could, go a bit further back and then see if I want to do something else about that. However, from what I've looked at, it would almost make more sense to just start some sort of chelation protocol instead. If you already believed that you had an issue with these and you were going to go through it, it almost wouldn't really make sense to just take a bunch of DMSA at once, which seems riskier than building up in smaller doses and actually doing some sort of rounds. Another big issue that I found with this is just a body of supporting evidence on really just the overall effectiveness of using one of these provoked urine tests. Now, personally, I'm not really against the idea of doing some sort of chelation protocol. I've done a lot of research on it, and I'm still a little bit on the fence about going in and diving in doing one of these. However, when it comes to actually the testing methods, there just really isn't a lot of evidence out there on how you could use one of these tests to really identify the amount of toxins in your body. The only actual way that someone could really identify how much is maybe in their brain or other organs would be to have an autopsy done. And if someone's having an autopsy done, they are dead. They are not going to actually need to do a provoked urine test. I think that this really makes a bad supporting claim to try to push to do these types of tests. There are other alternatives, like maybe even doing a hair test. I was reading in Andy Cutler's book potentially doing something like ALA rounds and building those up slowly and then seeing if you have a negative effect. But even those are still very questionable. Something like a hair test could even be very skewed just because of the fact that there's so many chemicals in shampoos and already metals. There's metals in the water that's coming, from your shower into your hair. There could be all sorts of reasons why a test like that could be potentially clouded and not accurate. However, the same goes for doing a provoked urine test. Really, there's not going to be a definite answer on if a provoked urine test is going to be effective. However, there is not really a lot of evidence out there that supports doing them. Personally, if someone more credible like Joseph Pizzorno is able to actually publish this type of research on doing something like this, or maybe his process of going through this, maybe there could be something out there from him or maybe someone else that could help, clear the air on how effective this is. Personally, myself, I'm going to just skip on doing a provoked urine test, mostly because of the safety aspects and the value. For me, those two things are just a really big no when it comes to really the overall value that I'm going to get and the potential dangers from doing something like this. Now, if you are considering doing some sort of chelation protocol, I highly recommend that you check out my video on stuff that you should do before you consider doing any sort of protocol like this. I go over all sorts of ways to prepare your body, and really, you might find doing this stuff might end up making you not want to do one at all.